Welcome back to the ENFASYS podcast series. In this episode, we dive into a fascinating question. How do we make complex farming systems visible so that we can finally understand how change really happens? To guide us today, we are joined by two experts from NIBIO, one of Norway's largest research institutes for sustainable land use and food systems. First, Giovanna Ottaviani Almo, a researcher scientist with over 20 years of international experience working across North Africa, Eastern Europe, and Northern Europe. Giovanna specializes in systems analysis, strategic facilitation, capacity building, and institutional development, and has spent her career helping stakeholders navigate complex socioeconomic environments. Her work is grounded in understanding how people, institutions, and processes interact in real-world settings. Joining her is Dr. Divina Gracia Rodriguez, an agriculture and applied economist whose research spans from environmental economics, consumers' behavior, agricultural productivity, food security, and climate change. She has worked across Asia, Europe, and Africa and brings deep expertise in connecting economic insights with sustainability challenges. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks
Morning.
for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, let's dig into the questions of today's episode. First of all, I would like to hear from you, Joanna. What is system mapping and why does it matter?
So, first of all, thank you for having us again. And we are working together in the project ENFASYS, where system mapping was basically elected as one of the tools to answer the bigger question on how to push farmers in Europe to adopt more sustainable farming system. So, system mapping is actually a map that is showing us how a specific issue, for example, in one of our cases in Ireland was achieving protein independence in the dairy sector, comes about. So what are the causes and what are the effects and what is the interaction? So imagine the system as a mechanism where all the cogs are interconnected. So when you move one of these cogs in one direction, the other elements of the system move as well, but we don't know in which direction they move. So because they're connected, some might move in the same direction, so achieving different outcomes, and some will move in the opposite direction. So what we do is basically we analyze all these elements, we see in which way they're interconnected and which are the effects. And this is what we call a causal loop diagram, where we represent the mechanism of the system and where the interconnection is given by arrows, where we put we can put a plus or a minus sign just to give an indication on what is the effect of one element on the other that is connected with it. So once that we have all the picture together, all the elements together, of course we do this in a participatory way, trying to include everybody. We look at this interconnection. So we follow the sense of the arrows. And when the arrows is coming back to the start, this is like a loop, and this is what actually we call a feedback loop. And looking at this feedback loop, you can understand that when the system returns to the starting point, what happens is that the system is hard to change because it gets back there. And this is what is basically is giving you an understanding of what in your system is resisting the change that you want to achieve. So it is very important. Sometimes these loops are not very visible, so you need really to dismantle the system in its very simple elements to understand, and these loops are hidden. But it is very important that you identify these hidden loops, because then you understand, for example, why some policies, they're not effective, because you have to sort of identify where this problem, where this loop is. And these loops, they also pinpoint what are, in some cases, the very structural problem, and they can be then translated into an action point, rather than, for example, let's say it is something that is common to say, we cannot transition toward a more sustainable farming system because the farmers don't want to do that or because they're not interested. And this is unfair most of the cases, because if you do this analysis and you look where the lock-in is, you stop pinpointing the blaming or pointing fingers towards actors, and you start more to look at the system as a whole, and then have one action point which is related to what we call the levers. So what are the elements in the system that we can act upon to produce this change? So this is what is system mapping in a nutshell, and I try to explain it
Thank you, Giovanna.
with linkages to ENFASYS. Thank you.
This was very clear, and it gives an understanding of how complex systems are. And that, you mentioned lock-ins, you mentioned levers, but Divina, can you explain us what did you actually do to understand how the system is working?
That's a very good question, Davide. Maybe the easiest way to explain what we did is to break it down step by step, maybe to understand it for everybody who's listening. I hope we get give a clearer picture of what we did to do that. First of all, we needed the building blocks, and of course, we need to gather them. In ENFASYS, the case study leaders did most of the job. So what they did is they followed a structured protocol developed by UCL and NIBIO and collected a very broad set of inputs. They ran interviews, focus groups with farmers, advisors, cooperatives, NGOs, policymakers, and others. They mapped the policy space, the governance environment, an actor or value network. And maybe you'll ask, what is a value network? Essentially, who is connected to whom, how information and resources flow, and where influence sits. They also had an online survey. They did a lot of work to broaden and validate perceptions, supported by gray literature and local documents. Altogether, this gives us a very rich and comparable foundation across the case studies. And in ENFASYS, we have how many? We have 10. So by doing that, we will be able to compare later on. And then on our next stage, once they have gathered all this data, they gave this to NIBIO, where our role was to zoom it out, meaning we analyze the material to understand the broader dynamic. So what supports people, who shows what slows them down, and how these forces interact, especially when we talk about, in ENFASYS, we always talk about transitions toward more sustainable farming system. And finally, we brought everything together visually. And this is what Gio was telling earlier about the causal loop diagram. What we did is we linked the main drivers and barriers that help us see where the system reinforces existing patterns. There may be patterns that we will capture, and where there might be genuine openings for change. So, and what I appreciated about this step is that all these insights sit together in a single picture. People can suddenly see how their experiences relate to what others are seeing. And that shared picture is what really gives the map its value.
Okay, thank
so
you.
So in 3 steps.
Yeah, Divina, you did an amazing job in breaking down a complex process into 3 steps that are still complex to understand.
It's complex?
It's still complex. And I believe it's also complex to implement from your side. Nonetheless, I think it is important for our listeners, especially if they're not researchers, to understand why all of this is relevant for specific target groups. Before, Giovanna also mentioned that causal loop diagram system mapping allows you to avoid pointing the finger to some specific target groups because there is a better understanding of the system and how the system works. But please, Giovanna, could you explain a bit more at length why is this relevant to specific target groups, especially in the case of ENFASYS project?
Yeah, IB, we have nicknames for those. Besides
I'm
being
called
colleagues, we're
IB.
also very good friends. So I call her IB, and she's calling me Gio. Think about when you're going around in town, you are, a professional, and you work. You've been working in Serbia for many years. IB, she's from the Philippines, and she's a researcher. Then we have Costas here, who is helping us with recording this podcast. You're in a new town, and you have to go somewhere. What do you do?
Well, I ask for information or I read on the internet.
Yeah, but if you have to go physically somewhere, you take out your phone and you open
the map.
And each of us, we're very different, but we look at the same map.
Correct.
So if you think what we're doing here is that we're building maps, which are, in my opinion, a very democratic tool that everybody can profit from and benefit from without thinking if I am, a researcher or I'm a farmer or I'm a policymaker. I have access to the same tool, and I gain my understanding of what I need from it. So basically, the overall advantage of this system mapping is that you help structuring what is chaotic into a more understandable way. So you have a picture. So you share this picture about how change really happens. And then you can see yourself in the picture no matter what, because we have been doing this in a participatory way. Everybody can see themselves. So I don't know if I answer your question. So every group of actors can have a look at it and then gain their own understanding of the system from what they want to achieve. So, for example, I have some examples here that I had to note down. But we had some policymakers also involved, and what they can see is that rather than to push harder on individuals when they see that the policies that they're making, they're not successful, they can reallocate some of the elements within the system to make it work. So we're coming back to what we call leverage points. For a practitioner, this is more related to the risk. So they can dilute the risk across different elements in the system rather to have it allocated in just one part of the process that they're going to do.
Yeah, so my understanding is that indeed this map takes into account the point of views of different actors and different target groups, and then they're brought together to show a democratic understanding of the system.
Yes.
And as you also mentioned before, this is a participatory approach that it can be a fancy word for saying it's an inclusive approach with different parties, different actors.
Yes.
But how did you manage to do this in ENFASYS? I understood that you have worked with the case study coordinators and that the case study leaders have done a lot of the work. But how did you ensure this inclusiveness?
That's a very good question, and it's a good follow-up with what Gio said. So for the map to be democratic, the process of building it has to be inclusive, which why you're asking me this question. So what does it mean to be inclusive, or what does inclusiveness mean? So in the context of ENFASYS project, the diagram or that map should reflect the perspectives of everyone who shapes the farming system, which are the farmers, the advisors, the NGOs, and each of these groups sees something different, like what Gio said. So the map would be incomplete if any of these voices were missing. And then by the time we started building the CLDs, the case study leaders had gathered a very rich set of material, but inclusiveness came through how we refined the diagrams. So what we did first is we developed the draft loops based on the analysis, and then we shared them in a workshop. Actually, we shared it in a workshop during the workshop in Serbia. You remember?
Yes.
During one of our general assemblies where we had all these maps. And then what was very valuable was that partners could point out what resonated, what needed nuisance, or what worked differently in their context. And then after that, we sent the diagrams or the CLD back to each case study leader with a structured validation checklist, and that helped them review each connection systematically checking accuracy, identifying missing drivers, and suggesting where links should be stronger or weaker or conditional. And were needed, maybe we also had bilateral conversations to clarify specific elements. So it wasn't one moment of validation, it was iterative and collaborative. And that's what allowed the CLDs to be grounded in real experiences and to reflect the diversity across the case studies. And that's how we build the CLD in an inclusive way.
Okay, thank you. So indeed, it is a back and forth process where you first develop the CLDs, and then you gather data, and then you validate it, and then once you have a validated CLD, which is causal loop diagram, from now on, I think we just use CLD because it's
CLD.
faster.
Yeah.
But how then how did you use then these CLDs in the project?
Maybe Gio can
Yeah,
provide more
so-
examples.
I mean, I can tell you what we did, basically.
Definitely.
So, probably there has been another episode about what we intend to do in ENFASYS. So, I hope I don't have to start from
No.
scratch again. Yeah.
There is definitely that.
Okay,
episode.
good. So NIBIO, so the Norwegian Institute for Bioeconomy Research, is the work package leader for work package 2. Work package 2 was what we intend for work package is that when you do a big project like this, you have to break down the work that you have to do in elements. Again, we're talking about the system. In our part of the work, we were building the causal loop diagrams. But then there were other part of the work done by other partners that were using these results. So in ENFASYS, in our part of the work, we use this to provide a diagnosis of today's situation in the 10 cases. So we have partners that are representative for 10 cases across Europe. And we did, in the first instance, a diagnosis. Then, in the second instance, we have been using it because what we provide with the causal loop diagram is a static picture, is like a map. Then we add, like we have in Google Maps, the little men and the traffic. So what it means is that if we move one element in one direction or in the other direction, the other elements are also moving. And this is what I was explaining you before. And this is what is called system dynamic models. So it means dynamic, it means that moves and that gives you like a prediction on what could happen if you take one decision or the other. And then from the system dynamic models and the causal loop diagrams, another work package has been developing what is called theory of change, which is another episode.
You can stay tuned because there will be 2 more episodes on that, indeed, on how we moved from a static picture to dynamic and how we arrived to theories of change.
Yeah. So a theory of change is all the steps that you have to do in order to achieve one impact of, like in our case, the project impact is supposed to move or convince farmers in Europe to adopt more sustainable farming systems. And we have some assumptions that we have to take into consideration, but this is the overall goal of the project. So in ENFASYS, the CLDs, the causal loop diagrams, they're really not the end product. They have been also presented as an end product, but they're really the stepping stone then to kick off all the other activities. So with the diagnosis, we have been providing the beneficiaries of this knowledge with information and the shared pictures of the lock-ins and levers and indicating where to act in order to sort of shake this situation that is static. Then we have been using it for the development of this system dynamic model where somehow we wanted to provide a bigger picture. So trying to connect the causal loop diagrams, all these maps. It's like you have the map for Athens, and then you connect it to the map of Katerini, and then Thessaloniki, and then you have a bigger map. So we wanted to, but still you need to find the contact point in the roads that you want to connect. And then finally, we have been using a set of indicators that have been coming out of all this work in order to then go into what then will be explained as the theory of change. And this is important because these indicators, they're going to allow you then to monitor whether this shift, this transition, this change is going to happen. So you can have early signals about this. I hope this was clear enough.
This was clear, and as I said, follow-up episodes will really dig into the methodologies on how we went from static to dynamic to theories of change. And but I want to ask you, you have explained so well what is a system mapping and the CLDs and so on, but what did you learn from this process? And actually also, what are the takeaways from this project that you could exchange and share with other researchers going through the same process?
Ivy will answer this now.
Okay, Ivy, thank you.
Okay. What did I learn from the process? There are many lessons learned in ENFASYS, right? And I think you would agree with me. Working with different people.
Painfully learned lessons.
Working with different people, with different groups. But I think one of the biggest lessons for me was how differently people describe the same issue. Farmers talk about timing and risk. Advisors talk about feasibility. Policymakers would talk about regulations. And the interviews, surveys, and governance mapping all capture that in different ways. Remember, we have 10 case studies and we speak different languages. So a key part of our work was harmonizing these different expressions so they could sit together in one coherent diagram. And maybe another lesson was the importance of iteration. A CLD, we just do it in one go. You just don't draw the connections of everything in one try. Many of the most meaningful improvements come from small clarifications like, hey, IB, this is wrong. This only happens after harvest, or this pressure increases when input prices rise. So those details might sound minor to you or to me, but for farmers, it might not be a big issue for them. So they're what make the diagram credible for the people living in the system. Because as a researcher, we're not really the one. We're just looking at them at a different perspective. And what's your other question? What would
you suggest to researchers that are going through a similar process? In similar projects, instead of complementary projects?
Yeah. Okay. That's a very good question. If I were to advise other researchers, I'd highlight two things, I think. First of all, don't simplify too early the CLD. The messy parts often reveal the real reasons change is difficult. So that's one. Don't simplify too early. Second, treat validation as a genuine conversation, or a genuine dialogue. People need to recognize their own experience in the map, and when they do, they trust it. That okay, this is valid. This is credible. So if someone corrects that this is not the correct connection or linked, then treat it as a genuine dialogue. And a final reflection, and maybe Gio can add later, an ENFASYS, as you remember, I said earlier in your, we built the diagrams after the data collection and then validated them. But in some of our projects in Nibio, we've built the diagrams together with stakeholders from the beginning. So that can be incredibly powerful, but of course, it requires time, facilitation, and availability. So the right approach really depends on the context, but when possible, co-creating the diagrams leads to deeper insights and stronger ownership.
Thank you very much. This was great. I think it's great pieces of advice for your colleagues and maybe even for yourself in the future.
Yeah, exactly.
If I may add,
Please.
it is true that we had other projects where we have been doing this with the stakeholders from the start, from the get-go, and that came out with much less problems than communicating our work somehow as scientists, because Ivy was talking about simplify. What we did is that because you can't actually produce a map with the level of detail that some of the stakeholders are wishing for, because our mandate was to produce then a map that was good for the whole Europe. So you have to simplify, not to take away, but to sort of merge some of the elements within your system. So it's like, when you zoom into your Google Maps and you zoom out, you have less detail. So our zooming out has been a very complex process within ENFASYS. And we could have been avoiding this by building with the stakeholders from the beginning, because there was one less communication bridge somehow.
Yeah, less intermediaries, let's say.
Exactly. So this was my lesson learned, that she explained it really well, but to go into the details for people that are listening to us now and they haven't been involved, I mean, it's like we're talking with our colleagues in ENFASYS. But I would suggest to really have a participatory approach. So decide who are the people you want to build this with and go to them and sit with them. We did it in Senegal, in Ghana. It was amazing. And they were very, very happy, because then they also feel part of the whole process. In our case, we're missing this physical contact with the people that we want to help in the end with our research. There are the farmers. So it's going to be good also for us as researchers, rather than to sit in our what is called the ivory tower and tell people, oh, you haven't been doing this well, or you should do this or that. We go and we get our feet in the mud, which is much better for us as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a bad researcher, I'm sorry.
A valuable lesson learned, definitely. Okay, I think we are almost at the end of the episode, and I have only one final question for you. The title of the episode is Making the Invisible Visible. And my question is now, after everything we have discussed, what does actually make the invisible visible in practice? Giovanna.
I can take it.
Yeah, maybe it's a difficult question.
It is not, come on. So what does it make the invisible visible for you? We have been talking about this zooming out.
Indeed. I mean, like if I need to think about a map and zooming in and zooming out, I would say that when you're really zooming out, you don't see the details, as you were saying before. Once you zoom in, what was invisible before become visible to you. But I believe that through the process you have explained, it's quite complex. The more you zoom in, the more, let's say, factors pops out.
Yeah, but that's why you have to be inclusive, right? So if I ask you, what do you want? What do you wish for in your little map on your phone? Like, this is what we have been doing. So first of all, we ask the stakeholder, what is it that you want? In the 10 case studies, IB, you did the case of Serbia, right? What was it that you wanted? It was to...
Supporting regenerative agriculture.
Exactly. Yes. So this is what you want. And then you have your map, and then you start to zoom in and in and in and in. And there you can see where you have to act upon, because there is a blockage in the road. How are we going to shift the road? Are you going to take the road that is not red at that moment? Like today we're in Athens recording. It was like a thunderstorm, and a lot of the roads were packed with cars. So we have been taking secondary roads to come to the studio this morning. We arrived on time, but it required us to change from the road most taken. You take the path that is there that nobody's walking on. Maybe it's that. Yeah. So this is what is good, though. The magic of this is to basically that you're able to align the wishes of the community or the politician or whatever with the structure. So you redesign whatever constraint you have so that instead of canceling your wishes, they redesign them in a different way, but still remaining there. So the tangible output of visibility, since we're talking about making the invisible visible, are our maps. So the causal loop diagrams with all the loops where everyone can see how things work in details. Then you have the list of levers that we have been delivering and barriers. And this is such also a very useful information that you give to the beneficiaries in the end, because they can see, okay, maybe I could act upon this element rather than this element, but they know that these are the key elements that they have to act upon. And but also the theory of change. So you have a sequence pathway with time-bound steps, so that you know that you have to do this by this time and so on and so forth. And all these steps, they're also linked to a responsible actor. So that in this case, you can call them out if they don't meet the deadline somehow. And you can monitor with the leading indicators that we have been talking about earlier, how your transition is happening. So what I like to say is that because I'm Italian and I get, you're also Italian.
About the science.
We have a very short fuse and very little patience. That through this, you turn frustration into design. So you reduce the amount of frustration, you reduce the amount of, saying, that's the fault of the politician or is the fault of the farmer. Well, you look at actually what the structure is and what I can act upon, not who. And this is why this is so powerful and visible.
Very clear. At the end, you make the unstructured or seemingly chaos into a structured and visible map.
Yeah. It's showing the hidden patterns that explain why changes is hard and where you can start.
Great. I would close with this statement. Thank you, Giovanna. Thank you, Divina. It was amazing.
Davide.
And thank you for the insightful discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.